nationally recognized trainer, facilitator, and speaker. He's the founder and CEO of Oakland Reads, which offers practical business training to clients, including CBRE, PayPal, the Kellogg School of Management, and many more. You can look at his website and see all of his clients. Previously, Dave was a strategic consultant at AECOM Strategy Plus, where he developed workplace strategy, change management, and virtual collaboration services for government, technology, and university clients. Dave is also an accomplished improviser. We have that in common. Along with his teammates, he won the National Collegiate Improv Tournament, has headlined shows and festivals across the country, and coached hundreds of people in the art of improvised comedy. Dave graduated from Northwestern University with a BA in communications and currently resides in Oakland, California with his succulents. And I just want to thank you, Dave, so much. He provided, for those of you that were here, the training that we had on Zoom meetings, and now today on Zoom webinars and the differences, and it's really been helpful to us providing these handbooks. It's just really remarkable. So thank you, and take it away.
Right. Yeah, Beth, thank you for the great intro, and thanks everyone for being here. I am really excited to present what is basically part 2 of the Zoom interactive workshop and webinar training. For those of you who were here last time, great to have you back. For those of you who are here for the first time, highly recommend checking out the video along with the workbook from the previous workshop that we did. We won't be going over the same stuff. So a lot of what today is going to be doing will be building off of what we covered last week. So again, I really encourage you, there's a lot of good content, and the link to that Beth will send afterwards as well. One logistical note is it's really important for you to open up the virtual handbook, essentially the guidebook, which is the, think of it as the textbook that'll go along with this as a lecture. All of the things I'm going to cover are covered in extensive detail in that Google Doc, which you'll have access to afterwards. I'm going to be going pretty quickly, not as quickly as last time, but if you miss anything, that guidebook will serve as an additional resource to cover step-by-step how to do the things we're going to talk about today. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. I am going to share my screen right now. And as we're getting set up, I really want to reiterate, we're going to go a little slower this time. So we're going to have time for questions after each module. We're going to cover basically 3 topics. So I know we saved them all to the end last time, but I'm going to be stopping after each section. If you have a question in the meantime, please type it into the chat. We're going to review that chat. I'm going to work with Beth to do that, and we'll get all your questions answered. So don't worry if I don't get to it immediately. We're going to make sure we get your questions answered by the end of this workshop. So please type it in there so we don't miss any of that. All right, in the meantime, can everyone see my screen? It says Oakland Reads there. Great. So Oakland Reads, quick little introduction. We're an interactive training company. I'm really excited to be back. We do all of our workshops in person, used to be, and now we do them all on Zoom. So we've been doing Zoom workshops for years now, which we're really excited to kind of continue to develop and hone our content. And I'm kind of really excited to teach these train the trainer style workshops, where I get to show you some of the things I do to make sure that these virtual sessions go really well. A little bit about me. Beth already talked about my succulents. I have a lot of other interests besides being a trainer, improvising. I love The Rock. Happy to talk about The Rock's Instagram for hours. But let's get into it. We work with a lot of companies, so we do a lot of train the trainers regardless of industry. These skills are useful whether you work in nonprofit, whether you work in technology, legal, higher education. Anyone running a Zoom meeting will be really, really useful to learn this kind of stuff. Here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to start with looking at what are some of the tools that are only available for webinar meetings. As opposed to the standard Zoom meetings, what are some functionalities and tools, both in registration and actually live tools that you can use just in webinars? So we're going to start there. And then we're going to get into, then we're going to look at how do you manage language interpretation. Zoom has a really robust feature for allowing live language interpretation into multiple languages. I'm going to walk you through how to set that up. we're going to actually do a demo with my assistant here, Athena. We'll introduce her in a moment. We're going to actually show you what it's like on the participant side, let you play around with toggling from one language to the other, and talk a little bit about some of the things you want to keep in mind when it comes to recording in multiple languages, and also just some of the nuts and bolts to make sure you have a really successful experience when you're translating live into those different languages. Then at the end, we're going to look at some advanced techniques for screen sharing, and also some of the things that go along with that, like the whiteboard, like pinning and spotlighting your video, which is something I've already done right now. I've spotlighted my video, and some of the things that you may not be aware in terms of sharing sound and sharing video over Zoom. So a little bit of advanced techniques there for screen sharing. And then we're going to make sure all your questions are answered. So we're going to stop for Q&A after each module, and I'll be online for as long as we need at the very end to answer any other questions. Last time we got some phenomenal questions, and some questions that I couldn't answer live, especially around language. So I'm really excited to kind of learn from you about what's on your mind and continue to get you answers, even if it's not immediately now. We can go back and look at some of these questions. So I'm already seeing some questions coming in on the chat, which is perfect. We're going to get to those after the first module, but I don't want to waste any time. I want to make sure first, again, that everyone has access to this Google Doc. It should be viewable. For those of you who have gotten it, thumbs up if you're able to log into that and you're able to see that doc. Excellent. Okay, that'll be a really useful resource for you today and going forward. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump right in. So first things first, let's talk about webinars. Now, webinars are great for a variety of reasons. And before we even jump into some of the details, I think it's really important to note, you need to sign up for Zoom webinars as a separate add-on service. The basic one costs $40 a month. And what it does is it activates all the webinar features that some of them are actually available even in normal meetings. So one of those that we're going to look at today is polling. You only get polling once you purchase the webinar feature, especially if you have a pro account. So, but you can still use polling in your normal meetings, which we're going to see today in just a moment. Another thing I want to show you, in a moment, I'm going to go right into the Zoom webinar interface. All of the tools you use to set up a webinar are pretty much exactly the same in terms of settings as they are for meetings. So if you need a quick walkthrough of all the settings you want to make sure are set, go back to last week's webinar where I'm going to show you all of those in-meeting settings. We're not going to cover all of those again. I'm just going to talk about the differences for webinars specifically. So let me do that right now. So the first thing I want to show you when it comes to webinars is, let me just quickly jump over to our webinar settings. Let me first show you where to find them. So on our screen here, on our Zoom homepage, you'll notice on the sidebar here, we have meetings. We spent all the last time looking at that. All of your webinars will be contained in the webinars section. So you click that, and I already created a test webinar for us today. So you can schedule them by hitting this blue button, but we're not going to cover that because it's the same as those meeting settings. I just want to show you some of the differences. So the first one that's really powerful and exciting about a webinar is link tracking. So here's one of the cool features you can do. If you go down to the bottom of the page, under invitations, under invite attendees, you can see here, here's your standard registration link for this webinar that we're setting up. Now, what we can do is actually create separate links to see where people are coming from. So what I like to do when I'm advertising a webinar is I create a separate link by clicking add here. And then when you create it, you create a name. So what I'll do here is say in meeting advertisement, if I can spell it, in meeting ad 6/25/20. And it creates a brand new link. Now, let's say I'm promoting an upcoming webinar in this meeting, like I'm doing right now. What I can do is copy that link and I'll put it in the chat box. And now anyone that signs up for my webinar with that specific link will be tracked here on my webinar settings page. So this is really useful if you're advertising and promoting webinars through different channels. So like I already have here, I made one for an email campaign. Here's one for a social media post. Here's one for me promoting it in a separate meeting. And that's really useful for you to see later on, okay, where am I actually getting my people from? And what are the most useful channels? This is kind of a really more advanced marketing analytics, which again, if you find everyone signing up from one social media platform or another, that can be useful data going forward. This is something that's very useful. And also you can see here how many people click the link, that's views, and then how many people actually register from that link. So it goes even more in depth into terms of traffic and conversions that way. So another thing I want to show you with webinar registration is what you can do to view people as they're signing up. So a really useful feature, and here, let me just adjust my monitor here. Obviously, this is a test case. So managing attendees shows me how many people have registered for my webinar already. There's 0 people right now. But if I had people signed up already, I can click view, and it'll show me the people's name, their email address, and when they registered. So again, this gives you a live look at all of the people who have already registered for your webinar, and you can see in real time who is signed up. Another thing that's really cool in terms of registration and data for webinars that's unique is looking at after the webinar, getting some data about who actually showed up. And this I think is a really cool feature. So I'm going to show you one of my past webinars. So again, you go to webinars, previous webinars, and these are some of my working from home webinars. So I'll go to my last one on managing conflict. And you see again, this is all the information about the past webinar will be available here. And then I get to go down here, and there are 37 people that came. And I click View Attendee Report at the very bottom. And there it gets you taken to the reports feature in Zoom. And what I like to do is run the attendee report up here. And you can see, you choose the webinar, and I've already selected that because I came here from that webinar page. And it'll actually generate a CSV report. And what's cool about that is it gives me a lot of data about when people logged on, how long they were on the webinar, where they originally signed up from, and all sorts of really useful data that you can go down to the user level to see how much people are engaging. All right. So again, this is useful. I'm not going to go through all that detail. You can poke around on your own, but again, this is how you find that data after the fact. It all gets saved. All right. So I'm going to jump back here. Again, like I said, we're moving pretty quickly here. We talked about link tracking, and this is how you do the attendee report. We just covered that. And again, all of this is in the workbook as well. Next is polling. So I want to pause for a second. Any questions on the attendee report or where to find stuff like that? I see a question from Denise. Is it only available on webinars only? That link tracking is only for webinars. The attendee reports, you can get some data for meetings, but I don't believe it's as robust as the webinar tracking data because it's going to require people to sign up that way. So again, important distinction there in terms of exactly which is available. Were there other questions about webinars or the data there? Cool. Yeah, Beth.
I think we're good. There was one question about captions, but it's been found. So
Great.
I
We'll
think
keep moving that.
later anyway.
All right. So another really exciting feature for webinars, when you purchase the webinar plan, you then get access to polling. And polling then is active both in your webinars and your meetings. So again, this is a cool feature that doesn't have to just be used on a webinar, but you get it when you purchase the webinar plan. Polling is useful for a variety of reasons. Number one, it's just a great way to have engagement. So it requires people to give you information back. You can share that live polling with the people. We're going to demo that in just a moment. And it's just another way to keep people engaged and present. Another thing about polling, you can use it in meetings as well as webinars afterwards. And the best practice here is you really have to create the questions ahead of time. And I'm going to show you how to do that in just a moment. It's really difficult to create a question for a poll in a meeting once it's already started, because what happens is it takes you back to the Zoom website and you have to create it there and then you have to refresh. So it's just a wonky process. You can do it, but it highly recommend you have all your poll questions ready to go before you start your meeting. Otherwise, if you want to take an ad hoc poll, you can basically just ask people to type into the chat. So you could say, okay, tell me in the chat box which of these 3 answers appeals to you most. And you can get a quick non-scientific poll that way too. So if you come up with something on the fly, don't forget about chat. You can make your own that adventure via the chat box. So here's what you have to do, just settings-wise, to activate polling. You just go into account settings like we showed last time, and polling is in the meeting section, in meeting basic, and then you just make sure that polling is checked on. Very simple, and then that way it'll be active in your upcoming webinars and in your meetings, right? So here's how you create a poll question. You go into your webinar, specific webinar, and you can create a poll by navigating to the poll section, just right next to the invitation section that we just looked at. And it'll pop up this menu. And what'll happen is, you'll just add a new poll, and each poll gets saved with a title. So you'll have a chance to title the poll up here, and it can actually be reused in subsequent meetings. And then you get to write as many questions as you want. There's a limit, there's a maximum, but it's pretty large. I don't have the exact maximum here, but I wouldn't advise you doing more than 3 to 5 poll questions per poll. You can have multiple polls within a meeting, but you don't want to have more than 5 because it can get really long to have people answer it. You want to be able to share it back pretty quickly. So don't overwhelm people with poll questions. 3 to 5 is a good number. So you type your question in here, and then your answers are down below here. You have a couple options for writing polls. You can make it single choice, or you can allow people to check as many answers as apply to them. So they can answer multiple answers to the same question, right? Those are your 2 options, really. There's no like open response or anything, or sliders. You can do like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 if you want to provide ratings, but it's pretty simple in terms of the types of questions you can ask. Once you're done adding questions, again, you can add as many questions as you want with the add question button, hit save. Pretty simple. From there, I want to show you what it looks like when you actually activate a poll in your webinar. So what I'm going to do right now is activate a poll that I pre-wrote for this webinar so you can see what the participant experience looks like. So the way you do it is at the bottom of your Zoom bar, there's going to be a polling button. And what I'm going to do right now is click that. And sometimes the window gets hidden, so you got to find that. And I'm going to launch this poll. It's about breakfast. So you should see a pop-up on your screens, and you'll have the chance to answer just a couple of fun questions about your breakfast preferences. All right, so on my end, I get to see how many people have already voted, and I get to see how long this poll has been active. So already I'm live, I'm seeing people as they're answering it. The numbers are shifting. And I'm gonna say basically a best practice, I like to give people about a minute to answer a poll question. And usually once about 70 to 80% of the people have answered it, I then will end it and share back the information. So I'm seeing already up here, about 60% of the people have answered. And I'm gonna say, okay, 10 more seconds to answer the poll, because inevitably some people aren't paying attention. So you don't wanna wait for every single person. And so in about 5 seconds, I'll close it by hitting end poll. All right. And then what I get to do right now is share the results back. So now you see on your end the results of this poll. So you get to see, the first question, which was a single choice. What's people's favorite weekend breakfast? Bacon and eggs. Classic. All right. And what's nice about this is everyone gets to look at it at the same time. So this is especially useful for generating some discussions. And then the second one would be multiple answers. You could say as many as you want. So I see a question. I couldn't submit the poll without answering the second question, but none of the answers applied. So not accurate. Not sure. I'm not sure I know none of the answers apply. Oh, so this, I guess I'm not sure your point there, but I think if there was a none of the above, I think we could probably add a question there to make sure if you don't like any of the drinks. This is just kind of a fun poll for today. So you also will get the polling data saved to your webinar afterwards. So you'll have the chance to review this data afterwards, just in case you want to use this data afterwards. You don't have to take it down in notes immediately. And then when you're done, hit stop sharing and it goes away. Okay, questions on polling? Does this make sense for folks?
Yes, there is a question.
Yeah.
Someone was asking, can a co-host create a poll during a presentation?
Yeah, so here it's tricky. The co-host has the ability. Go ahead, Beth.
Don't you have to go out and then into the,
Yeah, so the co-host can launch polls. So like we talked about last time, it's useful to have the co-host kind of helping run the technical side of things. You can assign someone as co-host to manage the poll, so launch it, end it, and share it. The co-host, I'm not 100% sure if they can create it live like the host, because the problem is you have to actually get into the Zoom account on the web portal to edit the polling. So unless that co-host also has access to that web portal, they're not going to be able to get in and make a poll and use it in that exact meeting. So you don't want to rely on that because there's a lot of hoops to jump through.
Okay.
Again, I highly advise you make all the polls you want ahead of time. And if you don't use them, it's fine. But making them in real time is going to really be a pain. It's going to be hard to do.
Yeah, we've had somebody do it at a fatherhood kind of father-dad discussions, but we've had like 4 people running the meeting. We had like 3. It just was really supported well. So the host was able to go back out, go into the meeting and do that. So it's possible, but it's tricky. And then someone asked if the poll feature is available in the free version.
Unfortunately, no. The polling version becomes active when you purchase the webinar add-on. So and the webinar add-on is separate from, free, pro, enterprise. It's again, it's an extra cost.
Yeah, so there's the free version, then you get a paid version that's like $14 or $15 a month. That has it doesn't have webinars. It just means you can go longer. Then you have to buy an extra little feature to get the webinar, right?
Exactly. Yep. Okay. It's not cheap.
No.
That's the challenge with webinars. Now you get the features for all of your meetings, but you do have to buy it separately. So
thank you.
It's got to be worth it. But polling's pretty cool. So let's keep moving. Great questions here. I'm going to go ahead and close this little poll box here. Another excellent feature for webinars is the Q&A feature. Now, right now on this meeting, you could call it a webinar. Technically, it's a meeting. It's a Zoom meeting. We don't have the ability to use the Q&A box on a meeting. So again, it's very tricky how all these features activate or don't activate. Q&A, even if I wanted to, wasn't available to me unless I scheduled this as an official webinar. So important to note there. You would see it on your webinar as a host on your Zoom bar, next to all those buttons like participants and record and Q&A and closed captioning. You would be able to activate it by clicking the Q&A button and it would pop open another window. Now here's some uses for the Q&A box. It's different than chat. When you only do questions in chat, they tend to get lost. So Q&A highlights just questions and the chat can be an ongoing conversation. So it's useful to have those two as separate, especially if you want to have people discussing and reacting and having separate conversations in the chat box, which I think is great for interaction. You want to make sure if someone asks a question 15 minutes ago, it doesn't get buried by thoughts and reactions. You can always sort. So I'm going to show you what that sorting looks like. The nice part about Q&A is you can set it so that when someone types in a question, it gets sent to all the hosts, but not everyone sees it. So the chat can be visible to everyone, but Q&A, you set it so that questions are only visible to hosts. The reason you'd want to do that is in a large scale meeting, you may want to deactivate chat because you may have a lot of people and you're not quite sure exactly what's going to go on in there. And it gives you the ability to kind of delete ridiculous questions or unhelpful questions and not have it be disruptive because not everyone's going to see those questions. So you're a little bit more in control that way about what's visible. It also gives you the option, and this is really useful, if you have a bunch of people supporting the meeting, you can assign someone just as a co-host to monitor the Q&A, and they can type in answers in the Q&A box and answer via text while a presenter is doing the rest of their presentation. So you can have multiple people answering Q&A questions via text and getting those answers almost in real time, viewable to everyone. So it's kind of a way to divide and conquer that way. And also in the Q&A panel, you can sort through them and decide which questions you want to answer and which questions you don't. So you can dismiss questions and put them away so they don't become distracting to you. And also what you can do, another feature is you click answer live so people know this is the question I'm answering right now. So that becomes visible in the Q&A box. So I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. Like I said, there's answer live and there's typing answer. And you can choose to answer questions privately as well. That's another feature. You can just answer the question just to the person who asked it. So again, there's a lot of functionality with Q&A, and it's particularly useful with very large audiences. And it also is very helpful if you're not quite sure, you don't know the people as well. So maybe you don't trust that the questions are going to be as productive, if you will. It puts you more in control of what's being pushed back out to the audience. So here's what the Q&A panel looks like. And I'm actually going to jump to this one because it's going to show you about another feature around voting. So when questions come in on the Q&A panel, you're going to see them categorized as open, answered, or dismissed. So with the questions that are open, these are coming in live. You can then click to decide, okay, am I going to type my answer? Am I going to answer live? Am I going to click answer live and then actually speak my answer? Or am I going to dismiss it and basically forget about it because this question was useless, right? So no one sees it until you decide whether you're answering it live or typing your answer. So again, puts you in control, you and your producers in control. The other cool feature is you can also set a setting to allow voting on questions. So this makes it so questions are publicly seen before you answer them, but it allows users to vote on questions that are interesting to them, and it'll automatically sort by the most votes. So you'll see the highest voted questions at the top, and you can answer in that order. If you want to, almost like a poll, almost like a pseudo poll for what answers your audience wants to get the most important. Again, it's a little extra complexity. I don't typically like to do the voting. I like to just answer the questions. But if you're going to get a ton of questions and you want to make it more interactive, this is an opportunity for that as well. All right, I'm going to pause here. Questions on Q&A, so on the feature.
Let's see here. There was some talk about one of our colleagues did a live webinar last night with over 300 providers, and it was powerful to have the Q&A and the ability to answer privately. So yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it's super powerful. And again, go back to the video we talked about last time. Making sure you assign someone to manage that Q&A makes it really powerful.
Yeah, I think that's what they did. So worked out.
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, we said, Clea, yeah, voting's useful if you have a limited time. I agree. So again, it all comes back to planning out how you want to engage with your participants. And if questions are a critical part, use the voting, right? Just instruct people to take advantage of that voting so everyone knows how you want them to participate. So again, a couple very useful webinar features that I recommend using, especially if you have large groups. Okay, so let's move on. Let me get a little water here. The next feature I want to talk about is language interpretation. So language interpretation is basically just what it sounds like. The ability to create additional audio channels in addition to the main audio channel, each of which allows participants to select what language they want to hear the content in. And so let me show you about how you set that up, what it looks like, and we're actually going to demo that for you right now to give you a little sense of what that's like on the participant side. So, and quick check, people can see my slides? Just want to make sure that's still going. Great. So for Zoom, they support a variety of languages. And by support, it's actually, it doesn't limit it to this. I'll tell you what I mean in a second. These are all the languages that you can officially interpret into on Zoom. English, Chinese, Japanese, German, French, Russian, Portuguese, Spanish, Korean. Now, if your language that you want to interpret into isn't officially on the list, it doesn't preclude you from having an interpreter in that language. All you have to do is make it really clear to your audience, hey, you know, we're actually going to have Vietnamese interpretation on this call today. What we're going to be using is a separate flag for that. So just don't be confused. If you click the Russian flag, that's going to be our Vietnamese interpretation. A little confusing, but don't worry. That's where you're going to hear today's content translated into. Just don't get confused because it's not Russian. It's going to be Vietnamese. And then your Vietnamese translator can just translate as they would normally. So it's just a matter of letting the audience know up front. You can cover any language in the world. And we're actually going to demo this in translating English into Filipino to demonstrate how that might work today. So don't feel like you're limited. It's really just a labeling feature that you can come up with a workaround for. A couple of requirements to make sure that you're able to do this. You need a higher level account. So this is the problem. You need to have at least a business, education, or enterprise level account, or have purchased the webinar add-on, right? So you're not going to get interpretation if you just have the basic paid account of Pro. You got to upgrade a little bit or have the webinar add-on. So it costs a little bit. It's not going to activate with just Pro. The other really important thing you have to make sure if you're doing interpretation in a meeting is to generate a unique meeting ID. We talked about this last time. It's a best practice to always generate a unique ID for your meetings. You are not going to have the opportunity to use interpretation if you're just using your personal meeting ID. You know, the one that you may have automatically connected to your, calendar account, or the one that when you click start meeting, it automatically uses. You got to create a unique URL. Otherwise, it's not gonna work. But it will work in a meeting or in a webinar. You just have to have a specific URL for it. I see a quick question on the flags from JJ. It has to be one of the flags associated. Yes, good clarification from JJ. You can't add your own flag. So you're going to have to pick a stand-in, which is a little confusing. It's going to have to be one of the supported ones officially, but that's just one of the limits of the feature. Another question around audio, before we get into the mechanics of this, it is of the utmost importance to have good quality audio when someone is interpreting. Otherwise, it's useless, right? If it's garbled and you can't hear it, you might as well not even have it. So when it comes to getting great audio on Zoom, there's some basic tips that I think are useful regardless of what you're doing. A lot of audio has to do with internet bandwidth. So your audio can get garbled if you have other applications accessing the internet. It's always worth it to close down everything, close down other browser windows, close your Spotify, anything that may be downloading in the background, close all that to free up your bandwidth. The number one way to get better sound is just get closer to the microphone. You don't have to get right up and mess up your video, but a lot of times the problem is how someone is set up with their laptop. They're actually pretty far away. The closer you are to the mic, the better your sound will be. An easy way to get closer to a microphone is to use an external mic, whether you're purchasing a USB microphone, or a lot of us have access to an external mic with earbuds from a phone. So this is really useful. It's not because this microphone is particularly high quality. It's that when you put this on, the microphone is very close to your mouth. See how close it is? So that's why it's really helpful to just use this. Other things you can do if you're still not fixing it, turn off your video. That frees up bandwidth, relaxes some of the impact on your computer. And additionally, if you're still struggling, really important to plug your computer in anytime you're going to be broadcasting. Your computer's sound card and video card take up a lot of power. And so if you're running off the battery, a lot of times computers will have settings that actually take out some of its ability to process sound. I learned this the hard way podcasting. You know, if you try to record good quality audio while not plugged in, it can become scratchy and clip and not work that well. So always make sure you're plugged in. And if all else fails, you can always dial into a meeting with your phone, right? So this is a useful backup plan. And I would say a landline is ideal, but who has a landline these days? But you can still use your phone as separate audio. So those are some backup plans. So back to language interpretation. You got to set the meeting settings. So it's, again, very simple. You go into your settings in Meeting Advanced, and you just need to make sure language interpretation is set to on. That's it. Otherwise, and then you'll be good to go. You'll have the ability to turn on language interpretation for a particular meeting or for a particular webinar. So in the webinar settings and in the meeting settings, there'll be a button that gets activated once this is activated. Again, all these like settings details are included in your guidebook if you get lost. And you can see once you're in the meeting settings, you'll have the opportunity as you're setting up your meeting to click this button, Enable Language Interpretation, and then you can pre-assign interpreters in the setup phase. This will not be visible if you haven't selected Generate Unique Meeting ID. So if you're not seeing this, it's probably because you're just using your personal meeting ID and this hasn't been activated. So it's just a quick, this trips people up a lot. You'll see the interpretation section, and then you select the language. And here's another thing, don't worry too much about getting these pre-assignments perfect. You can always change them once the meeting is started. It just requires you to have at least one interpreter assigned. So if you're not quite sure who it's gonna be, just assign yourself, like English to a random language, and you can always change it. It's very easy to change it in the meeting. Don't worry too much about setting up the pre-settings. So here's where the fun part starts, in the meeting itself, and this is gonna get us to our demo. So in the meeting itself, you will see, as a host, the language interpretation option. So let me make sure that that's on here. Okay, so where'd it go? All right, so you'll see next to breakout rooms, interpretation, all that kind of good stuff. And when you click into the interpretation button, you will see this language interpretation menu pop up. And from there, you can do the following. You can select who you want to be the interpreter, and you can assign meeting attendees to be interpreters from this menu. So people who are in the meeting already, you can select them and then assign them exactly what language they are going to be interpreting from and to. So again, if you pre-assignments, you want to change it, you can always do it live. And you can adjust what language they're interpreting from and to. You can also remove people. So if you've assigned yourself ahead of time and you don't want to be the interpreter, again, you can just take yourself off by clicking the X button here. Then once you've clicked start, the people who you've assigned to be interpreters are going to see a pop-up menu that says, hey, you've been assigned to interpret from this language to the other. And they click OK. And once that starts, so you click start, they'll get the pop-up. And then the interpreters will hear the original meeting audio. And then from their microphones, they will then create the additional audio channel that people can select into to hear the language they're interpreting into, which we're going to show in a second. So a really important note is that the interpreters, beyond clicking OK, they have to actively switch their language from English or from the original language into their interpretation language. This is one extra step they have to do on their end because they have the ability to flip back and forth. So once they click OK, their job isn't done yet. They have to actually switch. There's going to be a little button on the bottom that says switch from English to whatever language they're going into, just to make sure that, again, it will be active. And then on the participant side of things, here's what they're going to see. They're going to see in that interpretation button, they're going to see a menu once they click it, allowing them to select what language channel they want to hear. And so to adjust the assignments during the meeting, you can, as the host, you can go back to that menu clicking Manage Language Interpretation, but the participants get a chance to click, do I want to hear the original, which would be English in this case, or click into Spanish. So here's what you can tell people really simply. Find that interpretation button, select your desired language, and then if you want, you can also mute the original audio. So you can mute the original audio because what they're going to hear on their end is 80% volume of the interpreted language and 20% volume of the original language, which can be helpful if they want to hear the tone and intonation and volume of the original speaker. But if that's distracting, they can just go 100% into the interpreted language, which may be easier for them to follow. All right. So, and then to end interpretation, again, you just click on that interpretation button on your Zoom menu and you go back to Manage Language Interpretation and you can hit End. And that gets rid of the interpretation happening for everyone. All right. So what I want to do right now is we're going to actually demo some of this interpretation, but I want to make sure that we answered questions first before we hop into the demo. So are there any immediate questions as we get set up with this demo?
There's nothing that I see currently about interpretations. So anybody, maybe somebody's typing, I don't know.
All right.
If you have a webinar, a high-level account, is interpretation also available in meeting, or is it just in webinars?
Yes, it is. So if you have it, this is a feature that's active in webinars and in meetings, so long as you turn the setting on.
Yes, and I had understood, as did some other people, that it was required that the interpreters register directly with their email and then log on with the email but we need to have their email address before the session begins.
Yeah, so you don't. And that's, I think, just like pre-assigning breakout rooms, I find the pre-assigning feature to be more hassle than it's worth.
Okay.
So like what I'm going to do right now is show Athena, who first of all, Athena, say hi to everyone.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon.
Hi, Athena.
So Athena's going to be our interpreter for the day. She didn't pre-assign. I didn't pre-assign her at all. So I'm going to assign her now.
Okay.
And it works just as fine, just as easily.
Huh, that's good to know, because I thought you had to do it. So cool.
Yeah, it's probably a lot easier to do it live. And again, this
maybe you just want to have them come to the webinar sooner so you can assign them and maybe put like a couple, and you need to know their name so you can find them. Yeah.
So here's exactly. It's always worth it to get all the people who are going to be playing roles, have them log in early just so you figure it out before the meeting starts. So here's how it'll work. So one thing I just learned actually is the interpretation button is not going to be available when you're screen sharing. So it disappears on me as host when I'm sharing this screen. Now when I stop sharing, it pops up again. This to me seems like a bug.
It does seem like a bug.
So just if you freak out, don't worry, stop the screen share and set up the interpretation.
Okay, good to know.
So what I'm going to do now is Athena's already changed her name to the language that she is going to be interpreting into. So as a host, what I'm going to do right now is say, okay, everyone, we're going to have Filipino interpretation. Just so you know, it's actually going to be listed as Portuguese because Filipino is not one of the supported languages. So to make it clear, Athena has changed her name, and I'm going to add her as an interpreter. And you can see if you open up the participants panel, she now has a flag next to her name, and she's renamed herself to make it really, really clear. And hopefully you'll see now there's a little pop-up that's popped up on all of your Zoom bars to say English and Portuguese interpretation available. So click that button and you'll have the option to switch over to Portuguese, which is not Portuguese, it's Filipino. So again, don't get messed up on that as a presenter. So what I'm gonna do right now is read a quick short paragraph, and Athena's gonna translate it into Filipino just so you can get a sense of what it's like flipping back and forth. And I would encourage you, play around with muting original audio so you can kind of see how that works. All right, so here we go. I'm going to read a quick, the story of the oak and the reeds, which is a favorite of mine. So Athena, go ahead and start interpreting whenever you're ready. And a giant oak stood near a river in which grew some thin reeds. When the wind blew, the great oak stood proudly upright with its 100 arms uplifted to the sky. But the reeds bowed low in the wind and sang a sad and mournful song. You have reason to complain, said the oak. The slightest breeze that ruffles the surface of the water makes you bow your heads, while I, the mighty oak, stand upright and firm before the howling storm. Do not worry about us, replied the reeds. The winds do not harm us. We bow before them, and so we do not break. You, in all your pride and strength, have so far resisted their blows, but the end is coming. As the reeds spoke, a great hurricane rushed out of the north. The oak stood proudly and fought against the storm, while the yielding reeds bowed low. The wind redoubled in fury, and all at once the great tree fell, torn up by the roots, and lay among the pitying reeds. All right. So, how did that go? Were you able to hear her in Filipino? Able to kind of switch back and forth? Okay. Cool. Any questions on that? Now we had a quick little demo. Did that make sense to anyone? Anyone struggle with
I can't hear.
Finding anything? Oh yeah, you have to flip off of her if you wanna hear me. Cool. I see some thumbs up. Great, and good job, Athena. I couldn't hear you because I was reading the paragraph, but I assume you did a great job. And you can see Athena has switched back to English. So what that means is she is indicating that she's no longer translating. So it's kind of an important little thing you want to do. If for any reason people stop or it's turned off, they have the ability to flip that from language to language, from original to secondary language.
I have a question.
Yeah, question.
Now, if the person receiving the interpretation has a question that they want to ask the presenter, what do you instruct the interpreter to do? Just wondering.
That's a great, are you saying, so someone who, let's say, is a Filipino speaker, wants to ask a question through the interpreter to the host?
Yes.
Great question. So I would say, and again, maybe other people have a better solution. I think that the best way to do that is tell the instructions ahead of time. Hey, interpreters, let folks in your language know to ask you a question directly on the chat. So they have a chance to type into the chat box, which again, it's viewable to everyone, but instruct the interpreters to pay attention to the chat. And participants have the ability to send a private message to hosts. So a participant can send a private message in that language to the host, who would be the interpreter, and then the interpreter can relay that question to the host.
Okay, I'm going to complicate it a little more.
Yeah.
Or on the phone, or if they are, aren't able to type in a question.
So
interpreter just turn themselves back to English maybe, and then.
So here's the challenge. The interpretation audio channel is one way. Okay. So it's just going to be the interpreter speaking their language on that separate channel to an audience that self-selects. I would say if you have a variety of audiences that are going to ask questions in different languages, I might recommend doing breakout rooms. So you could have a breakout room in each of the different languages and then have either the host move from room to room or have the interpreter have conversations just in that language, just in that room. And again, referring back to last week's webinar, you can have people change their names as participants to make it easy to assign them to the correct breakout room.
Okay. Right.
I think that's the simplest way. I kind of want to think about that a little more. That's just off the, reacting in real time. Cool. To clarify, JJ has a question. Each language channel has a host as the interpreter, so people can ask questions privately to interpreters. Great clarifying question, JJ. You don't have to be a host to be an interpreter. I would say it's probably a best practice to make interpreters co-hosts just out of habit so that they do have a little bit of extra privileges so you can have private conversations with them just for the reason Beth is talking about. But you don't have to make an interpreter a host. I do think it's useful if you go the route of breakout rooms to make interpreters co-hosts at least, because co-hosts have the ability to jump from breakout room to breakout room. They can't make them, but they can move. So again, it just gives them a little extra power to make sure you're handling things, just giving them the independence to solve problems on their own. And I see a question from Michelle. Oh yeah, interpreters put the instructions for clicking in the Q&A. That's a great call. Continuing to put the instructions in a Q&A box or reposting them in the chat. It also may be useful to have just kind of here's the instructional document as a Google Doc, just like we have that for today. So all the instructions are there for people to reference if they show up late.
Yeah, I like your idea of putting it in often.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Any other immediate questions? We can answer questions on this at the end, but again, this is kind of it's tricky, but it's a pretty powerful tool if you set yourself up ahead of time with a plan. Cool. All right. So let's keep moving. I want to make sure I'm sharing my screen again. Okay. So, yeah, it's funny. You can't, once you share screen, you can't edit the interpretation. So I was going to end Athena's interpretation session, but I don't have that option once you start screen sharing. Weird bug, but good to figure that out together. Okay. So, a note on recording, because this is a tricky thing with multiple languages. When you set a recording, like for example, we're recording this meeting right now, and it's recording the primary audio channel, which is basically me and Beth talking back and forth. This cloud recording is not going to have recorded Athena's Filipino translation. All it's going to record is the primary audio channel. However, there's a workaround if you'd still want to save those alternate languages. Here's how you do it. You set the option for participants to record locally to their computers. So this is a setting you can turn on for either a webinar or a meeting. And the exact details are in that guidebook. I'm not going to go through all of them. It's pretty simple, but they're in their guidebook, how you find that setting to allow. It's very simple. And what that does is it allows people to basically do this. You, ahead of time, assign people to record each of the different language channels onto their local computer. So for example, what I would do today is basically say, okay, Beth, I'm gonna want you to start a local recording, and then when Athena starts translating, I want you to flip over to Filipino, and then her local recording is going to record exactly what she's hearing on her computer, which is gonna be me talking in English up until the point she switches to Filipino, and then it's gonna get the Filipino sound. And that is, again, it takes a little prep ahead of time, but it's just a matter of knowing who's going to record what language, and they know how to flip to it, making sure that they remember to click start recording, which I almost messed up today. Thanks to, I got an assist there. And if you have, 4 languages, you just assign 4 different people to make local recordings in those 4 languages. And once the meeting is over, it will process, download to their home computer, and you'll have an MP4 file that you can then reshare. So again, to review that, assign people ahead of time, make sure they know ahead of time, have them log on early so you can make sure they're really clear. Ensure that you've activated local recordings so they have the option. I've done that for this meeting, so you all have the ability to do that actually today. And then, again, yeah, this is where the setting is. So in the settings, you go to recording and local recording, boom, host can give participants the permission to record locally. So it will create a pop-up to you as host saying like, hey, so-and-so wants to record locally. You just say, okay. It's that simple. And then make sure whoever's assigned to kind of manage this, make sure everyone's really clear on their role, what language they're going to record. Make sure that once at the beginning of the meeting, they hit record, so they get the whole thing, and then they flip to the correct language once the interpretation has started. And critically, they've got to stay on that. So if they flip back to English or flip back to the home language, it's going to capture that language. It's not going to capture the translation that they're not hearing on their own computer. And so they will automatically, once the meeting ends, a pop-up will show up, processing recording, here's where it is on your computer. And then it takes a second to convert. And from there, you have a file that you can upload to YouTube or however you want to share it. So again, just like we talked about good recording, good recording hygiene, make sure you're taking care of those videos right away because these get really big really quickly and they're going to be on people's computers. So you want to make sure right after the meeting, you collect them because people may lose track of them. Okay, so just a best practice there. Quick question from Clea. It looks like, can the interpreter be the one who saves a local recording or does it have to be someone else? Great question. The interpreter is not going, I'm 95% sure of this. The interpreter is going to be hearing the English sound for them to interpret into. So their actual recording is not going to be the language they're speaking. So yeah, it's a little wonky, but that's just, you have to have someone else do the recording. Yeah, tricky one. Again, it's a great feature, but it's got little things that you got to make sure you capture right. Yeah, any other questions on this? I want to make sure we're really nailing this down because I think it's a super powerful feature. Cool. Okay, I'm going to move on to sign language because there's a couple things I want to show there, which I think are really straightforward, but good to keep in mind. And again, everything we're covering is in much more detail in that guidebook. So if you want to review, it's all right there for you. Sign language is actually a little easier because what you can do is just inform people that a certain person is going to be doing sign language interpretation and then have that person do a couple things. Have that person rename themselves as sign language interpreter, so they're very easy to find. And then what individuals can do is pin that person's video using their own computer. So it's up to them. They can scroll over the video for the sign language interpreter, hit those little blue dots, and then select pin video. So the interpreter's video will be front and center for the entirety of the meeting, and the other people, even the main speaker, will be minimized. So again, this is a quick way to remember this is pinning is done by participants, spotlighting is done by the speaker. So I, as host, can choose to spotlight someone's video. However, that applies to everyone. So that's a really powerful host thing I can do. but individuals can decide to pin in other people's videos for themselves. That won't affect all the other participants. So participants have the power to pin, speakers have the power to spotlight. And so that's just, again, it's there is some it's a little problematic because if someone is visually impaired, they're going to have to find these menus, which is problematic in and of itself. And I've posted in the guidebook actually some really good best practices for running meetings on Zoom for people who are visually impaired, from an agency. It's escaping me right now, but it's got really good like checklists on things to take care of to make sure that you're taking care of folks. And one thing that I think is really important is that if at all possible, have people turn off their video if there are people who are going to be relying on a sign language interpreter, because it's just sort of visual overload. So there can be a lot of cognitive overload if they're trying to pay attention to the interpreter while a lot of other people have their videos on. So that was like their number one tip. If you know that people are going to be using sign language, just have other people turn their videos off. It just makes it a whole lot easier for them to find the video and track it. So just kind of a thing you may want to say at the front of your meeting. And again, check in the guidebook because there's a whole lot of other stuff that's very useful if you're going to be running meetings with sign language. Any questions on that before we move on? Again, it's not like a separate feature. It's really just using the pin and instructing people to pin the interpreter.
Yeah, no, JJ just reminded us that when the person designated clicks on the record button, it'll prompt a message to the host requesting permission to record. So just a reminder.
Exactly. So again, that's another reason to have, thanks JJ for that, having someone as host who's running all the technical side of things. Right. So whoever is the presenter, it's actually probably the co-host, and they don't have to worry about managing all that.
Right.
It can be a real pain. Same with, we talked about that last time, but managing the waiting room, managing the chat, answering questions, all that stuff. Have someone else deal with that, not the speaker. Okay, let's keep going. So we're almost to the end here. Probably have about 10 minutes on screen sharing, and then I'll stay online as long as we need for questions, but just want to give a quick time check for everyone online. So screen sharing is a super powerful feature. You know, I'm obviously already using it in the basic mode, but I want to kind of clear up some confusion that can happen when you're screen sharing and then show, some of the other features that sometimes people forget about. So the way you hit screen sharing is on your Zoom bar if you are the host, or if you've selected the option to allow participants to screen share, which I don't recommend. It can be a little, you want to grant people as co-host typically to kind of retain that control so that not everyone is screen sharing all the time. Remember, we talked about that last time for defending against Zoom bombers. You don't want to have the option for someone to come in and immediately screen share some nonsense. So keep it to hosts and co-hosts. You hit the screen share button, and then this is what pops up. This is probably familiar to some folks. So a couple of things I want to walk you through on this screen sharing options. So the difference between sharing desktops and windows, they're not the same. So when you choose to share a desktop, you can see here, it's kind of a little small, but sharing a desktop shares everything that's on your computer screen, everything. Things you want to share and things maybe you don't want to share. So again, it's not as a bad thing, but just remember that if you have other, like you can see here, my files in the background, your desktop background, all of that is going to be visible to the audience. So this can be useful, especially if it's with your colleagues, like especially if you're going to be jumping from like browser tab to browser tab, or from PowerPoint to Excel or Word docs. It can save you some hassle so that you know everything that's up there everyone can see, and I don't have to reshare different windows. So that's the best use of just sharing a desktop. But again, it's everything that's on there. So if you don't want people to see your cat background, I don't know why, cats are great, but again, it's just a little more open. Sharing a window is what I'm doing right now. So you can see down here, it shows you, okay, you have these two Google Chrome windows. So what I've done for this is I've chosen to just share this Google Chrome window, the full screened presenter mode, as a separate, as just that window. So for example, if I were to minimize that window, there would be more stuff visible to me on my monitor, but it wouldn't show to the audience. So I typically like this whenever I'm showing slides, because it just makes sure I know they're only going to see that. So I think it's generally what you want to do, unless you're going to be flipping back and forth from a lot of stuff. And it's people that if they see something a little strange, it's not a big deal. Yes, I see some on sound. We're going to get to sound. Don't worry. That's a good call out. The whiteboard. Whiteboard is a cool feature that I don't use it a lot, but I'll show you what it is. It's basically a shared whiteboard that you can all write on. So here, I'll show you the whiteboard right now. We can kind of play around with it. I'm going to share the whiteboard. And so you should see a little whiteboard pop up on your screen. And what I can do is, I can write text, hello, and other people can write here as well. You should be able, you can draw stuff, you can write here. And, if you want to, I don't know what I'm drawing here. I'm going to draw a smiley face. So it's, again, it's like it's useful if you want to kind of draw something or annotate or kind of collaboratively work on something. Again, I don't use it as much because I kind of prefer to do this in another, I see some hearts showing up, people are writing. Okay, nice. I don't think it's that powerful. Again, this is me editorializing. So if you love it, don't take this the wrong way. I typically find other online tools are just as useful, and I can just screen share a window of, let's say, a Google Doc or something else. But if you just want to sketch or you want to draw a bunch of pink lines like someone just did, more power to you. Just know this is how you share it. And then there's different features like text and drawing, and you can erase and undo, and you can always save this. So if you want a bunch of people to draw on something together, it's really quick and easy. And this is how you find it. So I'm going to stop sharing that right now, and I'm actually going to switch over back to the window, so just so you know where it is. Okay, so sharing sound. Someone brought that up in the chat. Really important if you are going to share a video or something that has sound that you want your audience to hear, that you click share computer sound in the bottom left. This is kind of hard to find. They made it very small. But this means that when you share your window, any sound that's coming, let's say from that browser window, or let's say you're opening up a YouTube video that you want to show everyone, you share the YouTube window, you click share computer sound, and then everyone can see the video and hear the sound. Simple, but people forget that sometimes. And also it's useful to click, if you are sharing a video, optimize screen share for video clip, because it's tough to kind of rebroadcast a video. So I'm not sure exactly what it does, but it makes it so it's not choppy, which can sometimes happen if you're just sharing without that button. Okay, yeah, quick follow-up on the whiteboard. You have to click annotate on your toolbar to draw. Good call out from Leah there. I missed that because I don't use the whiteboard as much. So thank you for the help there.
There was also a, let's see, Leah mentioned that you can pause your screen share if you need to go to other programs, but you don't want people to see what you're doing in the back. We've used that before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good call out on that. Pausing screen share. I always err on the side of stopping sharing whenever I'm flipping around.
Yeah.
Which is very good. Yeah, the pause share is right there on your Zoom bar, right next to new share. So good call out there. We talked about optimizing for video clip. Make sure before we move on. How can you pause? Got the pause right next to this new share button. You'll see it on your Zoom bar. Big pause share right above stop share. You can't see it on mine because I'm the one screen sharing, but it's there. A couple advanced features, if you click, again, you look back here, this is basic. If you click advanced up here on the top, you have a couple other options. So you can share just a portion of your screen. So like I said, sharing desktop versus sharing window, you can choose to share basically just a section of your desktop. So like, let's say you have a really big monitor and you want to just draw a square around one small part that you want to share, you have that option. I haven't done that. I typically will share either a window or, just the whole thing. But again, if you have a use case for that, it's there. I also like sharing the sound only. So you can share the sound coming from your computer without sharing your visuals. So this is really useful actually for basically providing a soundtrack for a meeting. So one thing I like to do for some meetings is have some music playing as people enter. So you could share like some, soft rock as people are waiting for those 5 minutes for the meeting to start without actually having to share your whole screen. And that's also useful if any of you have been, I know this is sort of a side note, but a lot of times I've been going to a lot of Zoom workout classes where an instructor is doing a workout or like a yoga class, and they want to show the video of them working out, but they also want to have a soundtrack. So they can do this and play music from Spotify directly through the video and not have to share like a screen and minimize their video. So again, that's like the best use case I've discovered for that, which again, having some music as people enter could be nice as well. And then also if you have a second camera, you can use that to share. So if you have like a second camera set up to your laptop and you want to show something externally, you can share just that as the screen share. Again, they show it as like a document camera, which can be really useful. So again, these are somewhat small side cases, but these are available options. Yeah, used for demonstrating something. Yeah, like an overhead projector almost.
Yeah, I recently been taking online quilting classes, and they'll have like 2 or 3 different video cameras, one at the person, then one over the ironing board, one at the sewing machine. So it's pretty awesome.
That's cool. Yeah, that's a great use case. Yeah. Anything you're instructing with something not on a screen, you don't want to have to move your laptop camera. You can have a second camera, but you need to have that second camera ready to go. I also didn't mention it. You can share stuff on your phone or from an iPad using, what am I talking about? Using AirPlay. So this is especially useful if you want to demo an app or how to use an app. You can screen share what's showing on your phone, connect your phone to your computer via AirPlay, and then that can be the screen share you're showing on your Zoom meeting. So again, if you want to walk people through how to sign up for something or how to use a mobile app, that could be really useful and actually demo it rather than having to, jam your phone up against the screen. Cool. Questions on any of these screen sharing things? I know we had some questions on this last time, so I want to make sure that we get those answered.
Someone asked about minimizing the windows while sharing, but I think it was not minimizing, it was pausing, if I'm mistaken.
So like I'm going to pause share right now. So I pause the screen sharing, and then this is what it looks like when you resume sharing. But again, I think typically you want to just stop the share and you can reset, basically.
Right.
So that gets us to the Q&A section. So I don't have more content on this. Really, this is basically the end of the presentation. But I want to pause here and see if there are things people are curious about. If you want to unmute yourself and ask the question, that's fine too. But want to make sure anything wasn't clear, or we can go backwards and review something or something new. We're happy to talk about that also.
Anybody? Tell you, most of us have been having trial by fire, I think. We've all been rolling in the dirt, basically, learning how.
I have a question.
Yes.
So during the interpretation, I wasn't able to hear the interpretation. I think I might have missed a step. So a box appeared and I clicked it, but I wasn't able to hear the interpretation. Was there another step that I missed?
Yeah, so the box, great question. The box pops up basically alerting you that it's available. And then you have to go and click the big kind of looks like a globe, the interpretation button on that Zoom bar. And that'll pop up another menu that'll allow you to pick the language. So,
okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's a little tricky. So you got it. You'd think clicking that pop-up would do it, but you have to then click the button below the pop-up, and then you'll see a checklist of languages that you can select from.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Let's see. Someone is saying, I don't see the closed caption tab. Is this only visible if it's something that is needed for the meeting, or does it depend on my account?
Yep. So here's what I'm going to do. I have to activate it as the host.
So, yeah.
So
Okay.
I'm going to basically assign myself. And so now I've activated it and I'm typing captions. So you should start to see the captions here.
Okay.
And now if you click the more button on your Zoom bar, closed caption is one of those options if you're not already seeing it. And then you can start to select, then you'll have the caption button available.
Mm-hmm.
So again, we covered this in the last meeting too. There's lots of instructions there. It's not going to be visible unless the host activates closed captioning.
And this is kind of a silly question probably, but you have to have someone there that's typing it, or does it do an automatic?
No, yeah,
You have to have.
So there's a couple options. Basically what your options are is you can type, the host, you can assign someone to type, or what you can do is there's an API, and again, this is all in the handbook. You can use a third-party closed captioning service, and basically what you do, copy the API code for your unique meeting, plug it into that third-party web tool, and then what's cool about it is those web tools with internet magic have the ability with that API token to automatically plug the live captions back into your Zoom meeting.
Okay, cool.
And that's what those tools are useful for. So again, because the Zoom closed captioning feature is pretty basic, it allows connecting to better tools with the API.
That's great.
And then you can save those captions and share them afterwards. But yeah, it would be cool if it automatically did it by sound. However, there is a Zoom feature that will, with advanced features, like I think business it starts with, it will automatically create a transcript of your meeting afterwards.
Afterwards, okay.
So you can get a transcript created automatically on the Zoom platform, but it won't do it live.
Right, okay, cool. Our Clea's letting us know that our First 5 account creates transcripts, so that's good to know.
Yeah.
It does make the files really huge though, just so you guys know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good call out.
It's something you have to turn on or off. So you can also choose to not get them if you're recording your meeting. The other thing that's really nice about the transcript is you're able to jump to a time in the meeting by selecting the language from the transcript.
That's cool.
And you can edit the transcript so that if it got something wrong, you can fix it.
Cool.
Yeah, all those AI transcript things are great, but they're not perfect. There's always a little funkiness. And there's also other services you can use. So if you don't have the feature in your level of Zoom, you can still save the audio recording and then upload it to like a third-party service. Like I really like Trint, Trint. It's a very low-priced AI-based transcription that I really like the interface. It's very reasonably priced. So again, you don't have to upgrade Zoom just if you want one transcript or two transcripts. You can still just save the audio file and upload it somewhere else if you want to do it. But it won't connect to the video. So that's a cool part of having it within Zoom.
Yeah.
I have a totally random question, which you may not be able to answer, but we've been brainstorming. We did exactly what you said, where we had multiple languages and we had different people recording the language. But unfortunately, one of the languages, the sound quality was really poor, most likely due to the interpreter, or to the interpreter's equipment. I think she just was maybe calling in. I don't know what was wrong with her microphone. And we were thinking about how to sort of after the fact, go back and try to capture a recording and then what we could do with it. Like some random thoughts were like, can we have the interpreter watch the meeting, but record themselves talking, you know, to speaking the interpretation and record that? Would that work? I mean, we're just kind of like, I don't know. Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, no, I think Beth and I were sort of talking about something similar earlier.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
Yeah, I think, I mean, at that point, you're kind of going into the world of just using your simplest video editing software and basically recording a separate audio track along with the video. And sort of, you know, I like to use iMovie because that's, I'm familiar with it. And so what I would do is put the original video in iMovie, extract the, you know, soundtrack, and then create a second soundtrack, record as the person is listening, record alongside the video in iMovie, and then you could just delete the original one and have a separate video and then audio track that lines up. That to me would be the simplest. It takes a little extra work, but I think you'd need some video editing software to do that.
Cool. And JJ says video editing, yes. She's your go-to for that, I think. So,
Yeah.
well, anybody else have any questions? And I know how to reach Dave, and you guys will too, so I'm sure he'll be available for other questions. And we will be sending out an evaluation, and there's other trainings that Dave offers that we could take advantage of for staff development. So when you fill out your evaluation, let us know what other kind of things you need. Thank you, Dave, so much for all of this. We really appreciate it. Everybody's saying thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was great. Thank you.
Good. Yeah. Thank you for bringing me in. I mean, I've learned a lot helping teach you on this stuff too. So I think keep asking questions because that helps me develop my content, helps me get better at this too. So I've really appreciated this whole project, working with Beth and working with JJ and everyone else.
Yeah, it's been really fun. Thank you so much. And we'll see everybody. Happy Friday Eve.